Welcome to the Dream 100 Show, the epicenter of influence, collaboration, and exponential growth. You're about to discover the power of relationships. Dream 100 relationships. And you're one relationship away from a totally different business and life. This is your host, Michael Tasner.
Hey there, and welcome to this week's episode of the Dream 100 Show. My special guest for today is Tamra Andress. Did I say that right?
Tamra, like a camera.
See? You already freaking told me it. Yeah. My guest for this week is Tamra Andress. Am I still saying that? I feel like I'm messing it up. I'm saying Tamra. Tamra.
You all of a sudden are English. Tamra Andress.
Yeah.
Tamra.
Gosh, Tamra Andress. So my special guest is Tamra Andress. She has an amazing background of all different kind of twists and curves, and going to get a lot of fun stories to share with us. So welcome to the Dream 100 Show.
Thank you so much. And that is the best intro ever, because it's an adventure. Every day is
Definitely.
An adventure.
Love it. So tell our listeners that may not be as familiar with you, talk through some of your background. I mean, you have one of the most unique backgrounds of just kind of your entrepreneurship journey and the types of people that you're helping and how you got involved in church and spirituality and God and religion and just podcasting and writing books and speaking. Like, you've got so many really cool elements, but kind of talk through a little bit of your story of how you got from where you were to kind of where things are today.
Sure. Yeah. So I was definitely bit by an entrepreneurial bug when I was little, even though my mom kept a really clean house. She was an entrepreneur herself and had a daycare and preschool out of the home since I was an infant, with 12 kids, if you can imagine, in a very pristine home. And it was bananas, but it was so well orchestrated. And I loved having her around, and I loved just watching her thrive and to still be able to do so many passions. And so when I went to college, I had zero idea what I was going to do, as I feel like most kids do. Not a huge proponent of public education at this point, but we can have a conversation about that another day. And I went and essentially went to a counselor's office and was like, what am I doing here? I'm spending a lot of money. I need to figure out what I'm doing. So they put me through a series of tests. And in those tests was the fact that I should be a manager. I should basically be the leader of my own experience, an entrepreneur. And I'm like, I never really played with that word. I did a lot of leadership development when I was younger. And I've had a microphone in my hand since I was about 5 on TED, like TV talks for little kids, local stations, on the morning announcements, on up to the pep rallies. And so I never, ever thought that speaking, a microphone, podcasting, any of these things would ever establish. But I went and ended up getting a business management degree. And my junior year, I established with 7 other people a business plan. And the business plan was around maternity and infancy. And we ended up winning runner-up at our local, it was a huge, actually, our best business university in the United States. And so one of the people came up to me, and even though I didn't have the $25K, that would have been nice to win, they were like, somebody needs to do this. Well, 3 of the people in my group were guys. They definitely were not interested in maternity or infancy at 20 years old. And 2 others were Wall Street driven women, phenomenal in finance, accounting. And so I was like, oh, I want to do that. And literally, I never went to a job fair, never did a resume. And I was like, hey, me and my mom are going to go into this business together, because it was actually her idea. While I couldn't do that right out of school, I jumped into nutrition and personal training, and eventually started doing some MLM network marketing stuff. I ended up doing $1 million build out of a tour bus that went around the country for a dental practice. That was really fun, an 18-month contract. And eventually that brick and mortar, that one-stop shop happened. And in the midst of that, after having my first baby, I had a random person from Australia walk through the doors and said, hey, I want to bring the Australian #1 nursing bra to the United States market. Do you know anybody could help? Now I'm literally holding an infant, and I was also pregnant at the time. And I'm like, I probably know a thing or two about it, right? So I ended up going down this amazing adventure. It was a 9-figure contract to reinstate this bra for the American, United Kingdom, and Canadian market. And I had 2 kids at this point under the age of 2. My husband, we were like the youngest in the neighborhood, truly living what you would perceive as the American dream, but about 70-hour work weeks. And I was going into a chasm of despair in all fronts, not operating in integrity. And I had what I like to call a tombstone moment in my kitchen after coming home and witnessing my 9-month-old, who was already walking at the time. Instead of coming to mama, she turned around and went to daddy. And I, instead of pursuing her as the father does in the prodigal son analogy, I went inside and I was like, I'm just going to keep looking at my dollar signs ding on my phone and do some more emails. And I'm not going to do that. And I saw this tombstone in a vision. And this is before I even knew the Lord the way that I know him now. I knew God existed, but didn't have a practicing relationship with him. And I saw this picture of a tombstone and it said on it, entrepreneur. And I just remember being like, oh, like that's it. That's what I am. That's all I am. That's all I'm good enough at right now. And I knew that I wanted to be a good wife. I knew that I wanted to be a good mom. I would love to have had child of God on there, not even really knowing what that means, but hey, that's what all the tombstones say. So I should probably put it on there. And yet I was not walking that out. And so a couple days later, I had a radical encounter with the Lord in my living room, and it put me into a tailspin of quitting all of those businesses, all of the finances that were coming our way on a hold, actually completely quit them, not thinking I'd ever pick them up again. And I went into a cycle of just uncycling my life, essentially, of all of the things that America, family trauma, childhood trauma, marital issues, all of that I had to face in order to get right with myself, get right with the Lord, and ever be where I am today. That's been an adventure ever since.
Wow. A lot of stuff to unpack there. I mean, I love some of the one-liners that you use. I love the analogy that you said of having a tombstone moment. I don't think I've ever heard it explained or said like that. I've had an epiphany or come to Jesus, but not even using it in a religious sense, but more just people using it in casual conversation. So I love that, where it kind of hits you all at once. There's a quote that one of my mentors said to me 20 years ago. He's a billionaire.
Yeah.
And I always thought that's like, I wanted to be him. Like he's worth $1 billion. Yeah. But the quote and the phrase that I'll never forget that he said was, with great success comes great sacrifice. Yeah. So if you're willing to sacrifice all this other stuff and you're willing to miss the sports games with your kids and your daughters going to dance recitals because you got to be making deals happen. And when you're operating at $1 billion company, for example, are you willing to give that up? And for me, the answer was no. Yeah. And it sounds like that was a very, very similar moment that you had of seeing your life at that very moment.
Yeah. And I was only 29. So I call it my quarter life crisis. And I'm very hopeful I don't need a midlife one because I did enough work at that time. And it was really scary and really hard. I also had just like chasms of myself that I had never addressed. I don't think that they ever teach us, and they should. How to like be a good human is one of them. Right? Like that's not taught in school. And that's not even taught in the home. Like they might tell you how to be a good girl and how not to be a bad girl, or a good girl and a good boy, or any of that. But there's not really like, what is emotional intelligence? How do I self-regulate? How do I not live out of my childhood trauma? How do I address that trauma when it happens? So in that 3-year time frame between the time that I quit those things, and I call it a forced quit because part of it was like, it felt forced from my husband at the time, still my husband, by the way. But at the same time, I knew it was the right decision. So I was like, I got to make this decision. And it was my decision at the end of the day. But fast forward 3 years, I did this ordination and minister's licensing. I went and understood what leadership actually means is like, you have to lead yourself before you can ever lead other people. I started understanding emotional intelligence, and not just about myself, but about other people, and learning how to communicate well. I learned how to fall in love. And I was already married with my husband at that point. We had not really fallen in love because I didn't even love myself. And so I just did a lot of internal work while being a stay-at-home mom, then ended up working at their school for a while starting my side hustle that is now the full-time thing that I get to do.
Love it. Going back to the business where the customer walked in and said, hey, I want to bring this maternity bra to the US. Would you say that one relationship, so the whole thing with the Dream 100 is the power of one relationship, one contract, one agreement, partnership, et cetera, kind of helping completely change the trajectory of your life. You said that was one of the defining moments, at least initially at your earlier stage?
I do, 100%. Yeah, it really took me from local to not just national, but global. And having that global lens is now how I operate every day. And I would have never even thought that was possible.
Did you do anything to attract that person that walked in the door? Or was it literally random to where you had a store and they just happened to be in the area?
Yeah, they were literally having coffee with another investor that was local to the area. And they were like having this conversation about maternity, because that's literally what he did in Australia. And they could see my store was called Mom and Me, a maternity boutique. And they're like, that might be a good place to start. And literally they walked in and there I was.
Crazy.
Yeah, it was so good. I was so grateful.
A law of attraction type moment. So I love it.
Yeah. And that store has since been sold and is still operating in a whole nother capacity than I could ever carry it to. So I think that there's also like a beauty to being able to release things and seeing what other people can do with something you started.
So when you kind of had that quarter life crisis, the tombstone moment, did you turn to certain courses or experts or gurus, or obviously, I mean, you've moved heavy then into religion and ministry. And did someone guide you down a certain path? Was there something that you read? Like, how did you start to make those improvements in your life?
Yeah, I went to therapy for the first time, and that was a radical change. I had never done internal work or childhood trauma work or family of origin work, all this stuff that people do in therapy that's really difficult, by the way, and also marriage counseling at the same time. So we double dipped. I was doing that singularly, and we were doing that collectively every single week for nearly 3 years. And that's when I started getting introduced to the self-help industry and even to entrepreneurial support around podcasting and like masterminds, all of this information. I never had that support when I was doing all of these business things back in my 20s, which wasn't that far before. It was just all new revelation. And in the process of that, when you open one Pandora's box, you're opening 1,000. Sure. And yeah, I didn't want to live a life without knowledge of myself. And when I did that, it made me the most empathetic person to society, humanity, how other people are operating in this chasm and this rat race of, I think, despair.
No, I mean, that's a great point. And I think a lot of times our listeners, you're thinking that you just need to put in more work, hit those daily singles that I talk about to move towards your Dream 100 relationships, to move towards enhancing your life, your business. But if you, to your point, if you haven't done the work on yourself, it's going to be very hard for you to be in a state to even receive those relationships. Like if you're not in alignment and you're not being true to yourself or authentic, you're going to have these potential relationships right in front of you, but you're going to kind of not necessarily reject them, but you're probably going to repel the person on the other side. They're going to be able to see right through you.
Yeah, I've actually done like the Dream 100 project several years ago. And I remember having this understanding of like who these people could potentially be. We broke them down into 25, like top 25, and they were in different chasms. Digital people, like I was connected to Instagram, people I was one removed from, who's the white elephant, like the top 1% that I want to be connected to, and then who are people I already would consider in my Dream 100, but I haven't really tapped into those relationships. And when I did that work, which is profound work, people will tend to do it like in the real estate agency, real estate world, like, hey, make sure what's your top 100 leads. This is totally different than that. I started to realize the power of connection based on who I was, less who they were, and how we could serve people together. So it wasn't even about like, what could that person do for me or what could I do for that person? But together, if we combined our forces, right, is like, what could we do together to make an impact? And that really shifted that activity for me rather than it to be self-serving.
Love it. No, and that's a huge component to the Dream 100. It is if you're going in this with a what can they do for me, you've already lost the game.
Yeah.
But even to your point of you going in saying, great, I'm here to serve, and I want our listeners to have that approach. But as you're saying, if you're also going in with how can I serve them, but more importantly, what can we do to collectively? I mean, a rising tide lifts all boats mentality.
Yeah.
It opens a lot more doors and it's a lot more fun, obviously.
Yeah, definitely.
Is there a relationship or two that you ended up landing from your Dream 100 work that kind of helped continue to take you to that next level?
Yeah, I'm thinking of several different people, some of which I had to pay to be in a relationship with. So like different coaches that I've had. Mike Zeller is one of them, and he has something called the Zone of Genius work that I did, which was basically like all the personality tests layered together. And what does that mean for you? I was able to unlock my individual like magnetism quality. And I think that's important for people when you're thinking of growth is what is it that people are attracted to about you? If somebody always saying the same thing, how are you essentially monopolizing that thing? In the faith world, it's been a new revelation of like, how are you marketing your fruit? So fruit is like love, peace, joy, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, and I'm missing some, but there's 7 of them. And self-control, forbearance. How are you marketing your joy? So when you go into like, what does Tamra do? A lot of the things that I do is like my joy goes out front, and that is what attracts people to all the other things that I do. And that is so much easier than me having to sell you my publishing house or me having to sell you the mission to my nonprofit. So Mike would be one. And then another one, which is kind of like that one-liner that you shared. He's doing amazing things. And I know we'll probably collaborate in the future, but he was a speaker at 2 of my conferences. His name is Brian Hess. He's got the Brian Hess Show, another podcast I highly recommend. It used to be called the Perspective Podcast. And he said something to me as he was mentoring me through a broken partnership, a partnership that had just gone awry. And it wasn't when he first started mentoring me, but he said this thing that I just never forget it. He said, if someone shows you their true colors the first time, believe them. And I thought, I am such a sucker for trusting people. I'm such a sucker for believing the best in people and wanting the best for them. And it's that empathetic lens that I mentioned before. And yet every single time that I've done that since he's given me that quote, that verse, that life lesson, it's true. And so I hope that lands for people today too, that when you have somebody on that Dream 100 that you might aspire to be connected to, and then you get connected to them, have discernment, watch out.
No, that's a great point. And the other thing that I want to repeat that you shared, I think there's a misconception when you're building your Dream 100 that the relationships have to go a certain way. And one of the ways to kind of move that relationship along a little bit faster is to pay to be in their mastermind, pay to be coached. But if you go into that mastermind with the intention of learning more about yourself, growing, being of service, you're going to attract that energy, and most likely you'll end up being able to do some deals together. And I've done that with a lot of masterminds that I've joined, that if you want to fast track your way to a quote unquote guru or mentor, you kind of get in their inner circle, but you still have to play the game. You can't just assume, because I invested, like Joe Polish used to be the 25K club. Now it's 35K. So if you want to get into that circle and if Joe Polish was on your list, he's actually on my list. I think one of the quicker ways for me to get him in my sphere would be, you're going to invest 35K, but you still then, to your point, have to do the work and be of service and kind of work on that relationship building piece as well.
Yeah.
The other piece that I love that notion of, if somebody shows their true colors, believe it and trust it. And I think that's a really good point, that you might have a kind of a perspective or a vibe or feeling of what the relationship is going to look like. And you get on and you create, like, this person, they've been on my Dream 100 list for a while, but you then you see their true colors. To your point, be cautious if it's not in alignment with what you're looking for. And it's one of the reasons to have 100 names rather than having 5 names is that
True.
You've got some backup plans as well.
Yeah. And generally speaking, the people that those people are connected to who you thought you were going to be in alignment with are not actually your people. And I think that that can be perceived fail point of, social media or marketing because it can be a facade. And so I think being weary and trusting yourself and knowing yourself enough that when you get into spaces, you can feel that misalignment, that energetic tension, that pit in your stomach, whatever you want to call it, intuition. For me, it's Holy Spirit. So I have that kind of key factor, but it's definitely something I hold tight to now, especially when you have a lot of people knocking at your door for opportunities, and opportunities don't mean that you have to say yes.
Love it. Tell us a little bit more about what you're up to today. So I know you have a very specific crowd of people that you work with, and you've got a lot of really cool things. Tell our listeners a little bit more about what you're currently up to.
Yeah. So in the evolution of that company that I mentioned, starting out of memberships and podcasts, and my passion is people. Like the root of it all is to help people flourish and to live a life of passion and play and everything that they want and their heart's desire. But first, knowing that they have to connect with who is that person first. In the course of that evolution and helping people build their businesses, that dream idea of their own lifestyle, I came into publishing. And so I really have unlocked the fact that every single person, no matter what style business they want to build, they have a message that is intended to be a movement. And that's where the millions come into play. That's where the billions come into play, is to say, okay, I don't just have this small lens of a business. I don't just have this nursing bra. I have this entire movement of moms, right? And so that's where community is built. That's where families are built. And that's when traction actually happens. And so I have helped people turn their message into a movement. And I do that not just through the publishing house, but through building a business ecosystem connected to podcasting, speaking, their writing career, their business coaching career. A lot of people turn their methodologies into courses and things like that. So really building out that ecosystem so it can be a movement and have recurring revenue happening for people.
Love it. If you're looking out a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever timeline you'd like to pick with the people that you're working with, kind of building movements and building content and audience, is there any big waves, any big changes that you forecast seeing within the industry that might shake this? I guess the movements that you're creating can either shake it positively or negatively?
Yeah, that's good. I think the biggest thing that we've run into recently is AI, right? And that's probably a consistent through line for people. How is AI going to affect the publishing industry? How is it going to affect the content creation industry? And knowing even from an educational lens that, YouTube has now taken over education, but how is that going to look for us as entrepreneurs and as teachers and as learners? And so that area I always have my thumb in, and just kind of peeking behind the curtain every once in a while, going to certain webinars, learning from different podcasters, so that we're not behind the 8 ball in the process. I'm really excited to see where it can go.
So when I think about AI, I'm with you. I mean, it's I'm not saying that it's early in the sense of it's only been here for a month, but yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting things that it could do, especially in the content space. But yeah, the fact that you're working with your students and the people around you to kind of build a movement and build brand, I mean, that's a lot more powerful, to your point, than just having a particular product. When you've got the speaking empire and podcasting and courses and books and all of that fun stuff around.
Yeah, it makes it exciting. No day is the same here, that's for sure.
Definitely. I'm a huge fan of asking a final question around legacy. And I would love to hear, as people are reflecting or looking at your life, what type of legacy do you want them to remember you by?
Yeah, I mentioned joy. I want people to remember me by my fruit, and for it to plant seeds of multiplication in other people's lives simply by how me and my husband and my family live. I think building business on family foundation is something else I'm really passionate about. To be able to see your entire family infused in what you're working on, rather than you being a solo entity, because that's the reality of my life. And some people would call it mompreneur, but it's so much less that and so much more about legacy and what we're planting in our kids to pass generationally. And as a humanity, I mean, a lot of people are talking about how, Gen Z is, has their own things. As a millennial, everyone's like, oh, the millennials are the worst. And now Gen Zs are the worst. And does everybody just get to be the worst? But there's so much beauty in each of them. And so seeing people for what they are and allowing them to take hold of something that will last a lifetime, which is things like joy and love and peace, is way better than me saying, oh, I'm going to have, a million books by the time I die, and my library is going to be this big, or whatever that looks like. I could think of a lot of things, but that's the one that I'd be most proud of, is the multiplication of my joy.
Love it. Where can our listeners go to learn more about you and all of your different products and books and podcasts and all that fun stuff?
Yeah, so I've got the Messenger Movement podcast, and you can go to my website is fitinfaithmedia.com. That's where our publishing house is, and all things speaking, all the things that you're talking about. It's so much fun. But I hang out on Instagram most besides my podcast. And so if you want to connect over there, I'd love to DM me, and I'll pass a prayer or pass some joy your way.
Love it. All of us can definitely use some more joy in our lives. Tamra, it was an absolute pleasure to have you here. Listeners, make sure you go and check out her website. So make sure that they're linked below in the show notes. It was a pleasure. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Appreciate you. Thanks so much, Michael.